are truly multinational, operating in many countries. We are operating in 186, 187 countries. So there's very few where we are not present. And when you come from a small country, I think you have to make a choice as a businessman, as a company. But your growth potential is going to be very limited. Or you try to opportunities outside, and that's what Nestle did. But this is something you can't do in a short period of time. I mean, that has been there for a long, long time.
Bernhard Stefan brings over 2 decades of international experience across Nestle's global operations. Beginning his career in mergers and acquisitions at Nestlé Waters France, he has held diverse leadership roles spanning Europe, Australia, and Asia. Key highlights of his career include serving as country business manager for Nestlé Waters Direct in Germany, leading operations for Nestlé Peters Ice Cream in Australia, and heading strategy and business development for Nestlé China. From 2017, he managed the expansive Zone Asia, Oceania, and Africa region, overseeing critical markets, including China, South Asia, and Pakistan. Since March 2023, Mr. Stefan has served as chairman and managing director of Nestle Lanka Limited. He joins us today on our latest episode of Advocata Conversations.
Bernhard, Stefan, welcome to Advocata Conversation.
Good afternoon. Great to be here.
Thank you. Perhaps we can start by you telling us a little bit about your personal story.
Sure, no, that's great. I'm born in Austria, in a quite small European country, a landlocked country, and I grew up there, spent my youth there, grew up to a family of a sister. My parents worked in the public service. My mom was a teacher, English teacher and a university lecturer, and my dad was a biochemist, but also working for the government. So, I had a typical childhood for a kid growing up in Europe in the 1970s and 80s. It was an easy life. Education was always important for my parents, so I did my undergraduate, my high school all in Austria. And then when I graduated from school, I also started university in Austria, which might be a bit surprising being in a business role today. I first started medical school. So I went 2 years to Vienna Medical School with the idea to be a doctor, but I, to be honestly, realized quite soon that this is not really what interests me. And then after, a few years, I decided, okay, it's what I want to do is moving in the field of business. And that's when I then changed from going to medical school to do a business degree.
So Bernie, most of our Sri Lankan viewers will be familiar with Austria from Sound of Music. But for the Austrians, it's no big deal, right?
Absolutely not. It's actually, you're very right, Murtaza. Most of us don't know Sound of Music. The first time I ever heard about this when I started as, like a teenager or later traveled to the UK, to the US. And people said, Bernie, you're Austrian, Sound of Music. And I said, Sound of what? So I never knew about it. We have other movies. It's a true story. It's based on a true story from a family that migrated from Salzburg in Austria to the US. But as the movie was done in English, it only, became known and popular, I would say, maybe in the late 80s, early 90s, that then people got a bit more aware. But no, Sound of Music is not something I grew up with. There were other movies we had.
So, from my understanding of your country, you had a great empire once upon a time. And then in the more modern era, during the Cold War, you were still a slightly socialist country, right? What was the history, political history?
No, you're absolutely right. So we were an empire. We had an emperor till World War I, and it was the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So it was a very interesting state because Austria itself was always small, but there were many other parts of the empire. In today's Hungary, today's Czech Republic, Slovakia, but then also a large part of the Balkans, South Tyrol. So it reached it was a multicultural country, which I would say most historians also say was at a certain stage no longer, governable. Different languages, different interests. And then, of course, we had the dark period of the last century with First World War I, and then, the tragedy of World War II. And after that, Austria was first under the control of the four allies. But we were, and people today are surprised because we're in the center of Europe, Austria was at the end of the world. And when I grew up, I never ever went to Hungary or to the Czech Republic. All that is only, Budapest is 2 hours away. But the roads ended in Vienna. So there were no good roads going east to north. We were well connected to the west, to Germany, to the south, to Italy. But it was really a country at the end of Western Europe. And back then we had what was called the Iron Curtain. So you had the borderline between the Soviet Union, the Iron Bloc, and the West. And this was a bit before I was born, but there was a lot of, tension, of course, between, the Soviet Union and the Western world. And there was also a lot of people were quite scared that Austria, when Germany was divided, that Austria could end up in the same way.
So, but economic ideologically, you were not a total capitalist country, right? It was a more socialist country.
It was always a more, socialist. We have, a strong socialist or Labour Party.
Right.
And a conservative party, as you know, you would have traditionally in most European countries. It was very much after World War II, a country for decades, that was run by two parties. You had the left and the right. Only in the last few decades, you would see, as many other parts of Europe, where smaller parties come up. First, maybe it was the Green movement, but then you also had more populist parties on the right side and on the left side.
So, post-World War, you had leftist-leaning governments, but ironically, you are at Advocata, which is a free market think tank, and you also produce Friedrich Hayek, von Mises. You also produced all these completely monetarist free market economies. How did that Austrian School of Economics come about?
Look, I think it goes a bit back, even before that, when the time for World War I, World War II, when we were an empire and where you had, these different cultures coming together. It was a melting pot. When you look at Vienna today, yes, of course, it has always been German speaking. But when you look at many of the names you find of family names in Vienna, they would have a strong influence from either Hungary or, Slovak languages. So it was always a melting pot of a multi, country empire. And I think that's when a lot of these, economic theories, where they go back to, and not only in economics, also when you look at, other areas, a lot of scientists came out of Austria. When you look, for example, Sigmund Freud, goes back to these times. And look, after World War II, we always had a strong, union movement, but still, I think the country was always quite in the middle. Maybe we had for a longer time a Labour, a socialist prime minister, but it was never going completely left, but also never going really, as you said, never going completely, capitalist or being in that economically completely liberal.
So I believe that there was a large Jewish community also once upon a time, and there was intelligentsia. But, switching slightly to something that you probably do now, it also punches way above its weight class in gastronomy. The folklore goes that the Turks were invading Austria and they left behind coffee beans. And the coffee house culture came from that. Is that a true story?
It's a true story. It is very true. There was twice the Turks came to Vienna, and actually they surrounded it. And they had the second one was a big defeat for the Turks. But yes, luckily they left behind not only coffee, but as you said, they left this coffee house culture. And it's not only when we go to to a coffee house. It's not only to have a cup of coffee. Actually, the quality is debatable, but it's an activity you do. You go to a place and it's perfectly fine that you order one cup of coffee and you sit there for hours. They have, when people used to read printed newspapers, which I love to do still, you could, get your free copy of a newspaper and people would sit there for hours, read the news, debate, and they were fine if you only had one cup of coffee. So it's really part of the Austrian culture. Of course, it's changing now. We're also becoming in that way more, business driven. But this is part of the original culture, and the story is true. The coffee goes back to the Turkish invasion.
So the other famous export of Sri Lanka is cinnamon. And you are famous for pastries and cakes. And I think many of them have cinnamon in them. Can you explain how that all happened?
I cannot, to be honest, and it's a great question, and I have to be very honest. When and a kid, I love cinnamon, and we had it with as you said in pastries, or even when you had your porridge, my mom would put cinnamon on it, and of course I had no clue that it comes, a large part of the world's cinnamon comes from Sri Lanka, which I think, by the way, is a huge opportunity for this country because Ceylon tea is world famous. If we could manage to make cinnamon also synonymous with this comes from Sri Lanka or, Ceylon cinnamon, that's a great opportunity because it's a wonderful drink and, food, and not also as a drink. When we have the Christmas market, we love to drink mullet wine, and it's always full of cinnamon. So,
but where did this pastry and cakes culture come from?
I think it's also that we wear this melting pot. So when you
Right.
look at many of the sweet dishes, and the sweet dishes play an extremely important part in our cuisine, they come from different parts of the original Austrian-Hungarian Empire. And it was really then brought a lot of the families in Vienna. They had, chefs or house helpers, to be more honest. It was not a highly educated chef coming with them, and they were start to prepare these sweet dishes, these pastries that are now part of our culture.
So even apple strudel is from Austria, right?
I would say yes. Maybe the South Germans would disagree, and they say it's from that. It's really a dish that is from this part of the world.
So it was this melting pot. And then you came from Austria, and where was your first job?
So my first job before I left Austria, when I was a teenager, I did a lot of sports, and I always loved to compete. I did triathlon, which today is a quite well-known sport. Back in the 1980s, I did my first triathlon in 1988 when I was 14.
Full triathlon?
Not an Ironman, like what they call Olympic distance, but still long enough. Everybody thought, I'm crazy. And I realized also, look, I competed on a relatively high level, but I realized I'm not good enough to be a professional athlete. So then I started to work in sports marketing. And I worked with, the Austrian Triathlon Federation, then with the international one. So that's something I did next to my university, my business degree. And then when I moved to my MBA in Switzerland in the late 1990s, then after that, actually, I joined Nestle. So I quite quickly from, my degree, after working in a few years in sports marketing, after the MBA, I joined.
Were you at IMD or where were you in Switzerland?
I went to a university called European Business School.
Right.
IMD, I went later on in my career. I did some executive programs there.
I think the European Business School has a branch in Shanghai also.
They have a branch that's, to my understanding, a newer one and a smaller one. They're also in Barcelona, they're in Munich, and they're in Switzerland as well.
So you go to business school, and then where do you get your first job afterwards?
So after my MBA, it was with Nestle. I did an internship. It wasn't even an internship. We did a project through the MBA with Nestle. And that's how the opportunity came up. And in all honesty, and I even told that to our former CEO, I thought, look, Nestle is a boring company. It was like Swiss food, not really exciting. And I thought I liked the idea of consulting, even banking. But, when you come out of an MBA, you also thought, look, you're young, you don't have a lot of experience. What could I tell to a senior person? So then Nestle came up, why don't you join our M&A department in the waters business in Paris? I thought, well, that's great. I do this for 2 years, then I leave the boring company and I do something exciting.
Water business?
Yes.
Okay.
It's now small. We used to have a very sizable waters business. We have some global brands like Perrier, San Pellegrino. But also in the late 90s, early 2000s, we bought a lot of regional water businesses around the world. So it was a super exciting time for a young graduate, joining a company, working on a growth strategy, traveling the world, from Korea to Uruguay to the Middle East. So that was a lot of fun. It was exciting. And well, I haven't left the boring company since, and nearly 25 years later, I'm still there, and it wasn't so boring.
So Nestle is a company that is probably well known to most Sri Lankan households. But tell us a little bit about Nestle, the company globally. How did it start and what does it do now?
So it's all started in Switzerland. It was founded by a German pharmacist who was originally born close to Frankfurt in Germany, but he moved to the Lake of Geneva in the western part of Switzerland, and in the mid-19th century, in 1866, he started his first business. And it was, what's hard to believe today, back then Switzerland was an extremely poor country. It was a landlocked country in the center of Europe, heavily relying on agriculture, and infant mortality was extremely high. And that's when the pharmacist, when Henry Nestle decided, look, there's a problem because some mothers can't breastfeed. So he developed this first product, which is called Farine Nestlé, or it's like infant cereal. And that was the first product back in 1866. And that's how the company started. That's where we have the name from. Till today, our head office is in the same town.
Nestle means what?
Nestle is his family name.
His
so
family name.
the gentleman, the founder, was called Henry Nestle.
Okay.
That was his name. A lot of people, you've seen our logo has a bird's nest. In German, nest means bird's nest. So Nestle would be like little nest. But that's his family name. That's how it started. And this is still
where in Switzerland?
in Vevey at the lakeshore of Lake Geneva. So it's at
the French
eastern,
part.
the French part of Switzerland, at very close to the French border, relatively close to Geneva.
So that was the beginning.
That was the beginning.
Then what was the progression thereafter?
So it started with this nutrition product, which is till today very important for us.
Right.
And then very early on, even before 1900, Nestle merged with another company, the Anglo-Swiss Dairy Company. So it was a Swiss company that was founded by two American brothers, the Page brothers, and they had a dairy business. And so that became when the company got a bit bigger. And what's interesting, Murtaza, Nestle went internationally already at the end of the 19th century. So very early on, the company started to export products to other countries in Europe, but then also quite early went out to North America, but also to some of the Asian countries.
So Switzerland is very good with dairy. Was there some history behind this? Were they very good in cheese making?
It was always, as it was an agriculturally driven economy back then, and they always had high quality of milk due to great pasture land. Water was never an issue. In winter, okay, it can get quite cold, but that is actually a quite good climate for dairy farming. Tropical climate is very bad, but cold temperature is fine. So that's, I would say, how the Swiss dairy industry really, started high quality milk. And that's, as you said, there is a big dairy industry, which is, of course, in cheese, but also milk chocolate was developed in Switzerland. That was also...
They put milk into chocolate?
Yes, so you mix basically cocoa, mass with milk, and that's when you get the creamy chocolate.
Right.
Then when you have the what they call dark chocolate, where you have basically no milk or very much lower content of milk. But the creaminess in the chocolate that melts in your mouth, this is when you have milk or milk chocolate.
So it was in Switzerland where they came up with this?
Yes.
And was this a business that Nestle acquired into, or?
We did. There's a company called Caillé. It was a Swiss gentleman, and there were a few people who started to make chocolate, but we acquired Caillé also back in the early 20th century. So that's how we got into the chocolate business. And actually, it's an interesting point that you make, because of course we have many brands today. Globally, we have 2,000 brands, and it's a bit of a mix that there are some brands we developed inside the company at Nestle, for example, Nescafé. And there's many other brands that people associate with us, or might even not know it's part of Nestle, that we acquired over the last 150, 160 years.
Now, you mentioned Nescafé. Again, I believe the story is during First World War or after First World War, the Americans asked you all to develop an instant coffee. Am I correct?
It was back in 1938, if I'm correct now, where we developed Nescafé. But the interesting thing, actually, the development goes back on a technology that we first used for drying milk. So milk powder was always a problem to keep milk. And there's different ways what you can do. I mean, of course, you could chill it, which back then was a technical limitation. One way what many European countries used to do is, you make cheese, but then you also have some byproducts. You have whey, or you can make butter where you use the milk fat. But of course, drying the milk to create milk powder is a good way, because milk powder has a much longer shelf life than liquid milk. And basically, the same technology that we use for drying milk is also used for Nescafé, where you have liquid coffee, and that is then with heat and pressure dried into soluble coffee. And that's Nescafé invented soluble coffee, and it was then getting a lot of popularity during World War II when the American soldiers, the GIs, they got their coffee through Nescafé.
So you said that, the Nestle internationalized very early in its history. So perhaps the narrative was Switzerland was too small a market. But in its very early days, it also went out to the United States, is it?
It went out very early, and I think what you say is very true. Not only for Nestle, I think for many Swiss companies. When you look today for us, our home market, Switzerland, is less than 2% of our revenue. And when you come from a small country, I think you have to make a choice as a businessman, as a company. Yes, either, you want to be, a big fish in a very small pond and you're happy with this, but your growth potential is going to be very limited. Or you try to exploit opportunities outside, and that's what Nestle did, but that's what many of the other Swiss companies in the pharma industry, in the watch industries did. And I think they always, though, on one hand, kept a bit of the Swissness. So when you look today, we are a global company, but still a lot of people, associate us with being a Swiss company. But we are truly multinational, operating in many countries, in basically over 180 countries in the world.
So you mentioned about being a Swiss company. Is there something unique about Swiss companies? What do they do differently, or what is their philosophy?
I think it's hard to say, is there something unique? But one point we talked about is, as you come from a small country, if you want to grow, need to go out. And what is different, I've observed that in other countries, when you look at companies coming from big home markets, American companies or German companies or French companies, very often the percentage of revenue in their home market is extremely sizable. And that, of course, cascades through the organization. If you look at the top management of American companies, very often it's a large number of Americans. Same for German companies. I remember when I lived in China with Nestle, and we had these CEO meetings. The German companies always had German CEOs. The French, the Americans. The Swiss companies, Nestle, the pharma companies, ABB, the banks, they had a mix of, Asians, Europeans. My boss back then was Pakistani. So I think there is this openness to understand, if you want to grow bigger and outside, you need to, also embrace different cultures. But still, I think what's important, stay true to your purpose and stay true to your values.
Since my day job is also in the capital markets, internationally, when I go to some of the conferences, the CFA events, they always recommend some allocation to Swiss assets. And this is Swiss companies respect capital, that they basically, are very shareholder friendly. Now, Nestle is a purely shareholder. I mean, is it widespread, the shareholding? Or?
Absolutely. So our largest, we don't have an anchor shareholder, and
Right.
we never had. The Nestle family of our founder, they moved out, over 100 years ago. So today the largest shareholder would be one of the big, investment funds, institutional investors, but with a shareholding of less than 4%.
Okay, so it's a widespread.
Widespread. Majority of the capital now is held by shareholders of outside Switzerland. For a long time it was Swiss, but of course the Swiss banks, the Swiss institutional investors were very big. But today we have a large shareholder base in the US, but it's actually quite widely spread also into other parts of the world like Asia.
So Bernhard, tell us a little bit about Nestle globally. How big are you? How many countries geographically? Your entire product portfolio?
Sure. So we are, I would say, one of the most global multinationals. We are operating in 186, 187 countries. So there's very few where we are not present. North Korea and all that. But other than that, we are there. We have last year, 2024, the revenue was about 92 billion Swiss francs, which is like 92 billion USD. So it's very similar. And globally, we have over 270,000 associates, employees, 350 factories around the world producing the portfolio. It's a wide portfolio, very much focusing on food and beverage. So the biggest categories we operate in is beverages, coffee, and a big brand is Nescafé, but then we have other brands like Nespresso as well. Then dairy is a big part of the portfolio where we have milk powder, but also our infant nutrition business that has been the original, as I told you earlier, the core of the company. Confectionery is big. KitKat is the most global brand that is again available in many countries around the world. Maggie, a brand that in, for example, Sri Lanka, everybody associates with noodles, is also one of our brands in the food portfolio. But then also what a lot of people might not know, we are in the pet care business. Actually, pet food is our second largest category, nearly 20 billion annual sales, where we sell under a brand called Nestle Purina Pet Care, and we are the global leader in the pet care industry, but very much focused on food and beverage for humans and for animals.
So you said your revenues are about 90 billion Swiss francs, maybe a little bit in excess of $100 billion. How would you slice it? Which is the biggest business?
North America. So from a North America from a geography point of view.
So that would account for
about 30%.
30%.
Then we are all globally organized in 3 regions, as we call it. The Americas, going from Canada all the way down to Chile. Then we have Europe, and then we have Asia, Oceania, and Africa. The biggest geographic spread, but biggest is Americas. Single country is the US.
So the Americas is what percentage?
The Americas is close to 40%.
Okay.
Then the second largest is Asia, Oceania, Africa. And then Europe is the third largest. And from a country perspective, number 1 is the US, followed by China being number 2, and then Brazil number 3.
So if you look at in terms of product portfolio, which is the largest revenue product?
So coffee is our coffee with the different brands. As Nescafe, Nespresso. Our premium coffee capsule system is also about a 6 billion business. So coffee is the number 1.
So coffee is about what?
It's about 25% of the portfolio. And pet care is just about 20%.
Right. And the confectionery business?
Is smaller. It's confectionery is one of these businesses. We are not operating in every country, so it's limited to a few, and there the biggest brand is Kit Kat. So this is less than 10%, our confectionery business.
And then you also have ice cream business.
We have an ice cream business. Ice cream is something, again, that is only operated in a number of countries. So, for example, in Asia, we operate ice cream in Malaysia and in Thailand. We have some markets in South America. But then also we used to be operating in North America and Europe. And this business, we entered into a joint venture with a private equity company that now operates under the name of Froneri, where we are a minority shareholder. But that's actually a quite sizable ice cream business.
So what about Movenpick?
Movenpick is part of Movenpick ice cream is part of the joint venture with the private equity company under Froneri.
Right.
And there we have the brand for ice cream. Movenpick is another Swiss brand. They operate in coffee, in restaurants, but we are, so to say, only operating in the ice cream.
So there is a hotel brand also?
There's a hotel brand also.
Originally, were they all one company? Or?
They were originally long time ago one company, and that was controlled by holding, and then we acquired the ice cream brand from that company. So
we were also chatting before we started this that you all have a minority stake in L'Oréal, the personal care and cosmetics, right?
That's a financial investment. Nestle acquired this going back to the late 70s, early 80s.
Okay.
And today we have a financial stake in L'Oréal of around 20% of the company, which is a very successful company and very successful investment, I would say.
So can you talk a little bit about what Nestle does in innovation and what you all have done in the last decade?
Sure. So we have a very sizable innovation R&D team. One, we have a core innovation center called Nestle Research Center in Switzerland, in Lausanne, where we work with a number of also external researchers, even some of the Nobel laureates, where we do some, I would say, really basic fundamental research on less maybe product-related activities, but more how can you revolutionize sugar molecules and all of this. This is very scientific. And then the next layer, so to say, is we have a category of product technology centers, research centers. So we have one for coffee, we have some for confectionery, for dairy. And this is where we then work more on making a transformation from, more, base research into a product. And then, of course, around the world, I told you we have over 300 factories. In all of these factories, we have application groups where we really then work with the local markets to take an idea to a ready-to-launch product in this market. Our total spend annually is about just under 2 billion Swiss francs, under $2 billion for R&D, which is a sizable amount. And I think that has been one of the reasons why we have been a successful company for 160 years, and why we managed to also in areas that become very competitive, and where you see new entrants, where we can still stay ahead of the curve and we don't become a commodity.
So you don't have a portfolio of local brands?
We do have local brands in countries. So I would say we have, let me maybe say on our portfolio, I would say we have 3 types of products or brands. We have some global brands, which are actually quite limited, but a global brand would be Nespresso. It's the same product around the world. Nespresso is produced in 2 factories in Switzerland, and if you buy a Nespresso in Switzerland or in New York or in Sydney or in Delhi, it's coming out of the same factory, it's the same product, it's the same way how we connect with consumers, how we reach consumers. So these are the global brands. Other example would be Perrier or San Pellegrino, where we know we produce the water at one source and then it is globally distributed, globally sold. Then we have some global brands. But even when you have a global brand like KitKat, it still varies a bit from country to country. So KitKat originally, comes out of the UK. But today, for example, our biggest KitKat market in the world is Brazil. But we have a big KitKat business in Australia, in Japan, in India. And then the taste profile is, adjusted a little bit to local, preferences. Some people, when you look at chocolate, they prefer it more milky, more creamy. Other markets like a bit more of a darker, less sweet chocolate. So although it's a global brand, then you have variations of the product locally. And this product is also produced in different factories. In India, we have now 2 factories where we make it. We have a huge one in Australia, but there's different factories around the world for KitKat. Same would be true for Nescafe. Yes, it's a global brand, but again, the way how people, local consumers consume, it's different because food is local. Food is not global, and therefore, some like it more sweet, some like their coffee more bitter, and that's why, although we have global brands, it is a bit, adjusted. Maggie would be the same example. I told you we have Maggie noodles here. Our Maggie noodles in Sri Lanka are very different to the Maggie noodles in India, and the ones in Europe are completely different. The best ones are from Sri Lanka, but that's another story. So these are our, I would say, the global brands. And then also we have some local brands that only exist in one country. For example, we have, some confectionery brands in Latin America that, is really, Garoto, Brazil is a huge brand there, but it only exists in one market. Or in China, we have, a brand called Jafferjee. It's also in confectionery and snacking that only exists there. We have a food brand there also. So this also exists in some markets where we acquired companies or we entered, partnerships, and then we really develop this brand within a market and don't necessarily take it out.
So if you take some of your iconic brands, now take the confectionery industry. Is your center for confectionery in the UK or is it?
In the UK, yes. So our research center is in York, in the center of the UK. That's where a company called Rowntrees used to be, and we acquired that again back in the 1980s. And we kept our global research center for confectionery there. And then, we work on product development, but also, for example, this week we made an announcement that our research team has worked on ways to make a cocoa plant more resistant, to increase and to use not only the center of the cocoa bean, but actually a larger part of the bean, which will allow farmers to increase the yield, which will make the product, more, make it more available and also more sustainable going forward.
It's interesting. You probably have read strategy books, the famous strategy professor Michael Porter, and he wrote a book called Competitive Advantage of Nations.
Yes.
And he talked about cluster. And one of the things he talked about is the confectionery cluster that sits in UK. Cadbury's is not very far from York because it is in Birmingham.
No, exactly.
It's in Coventry. Yes. And because you have very sophisticated consumers, etc., it's amazing that the chocolate and the robot and very sophisticated consumers. So let's look at that cluster argument and look at Maggie, a product that most Sri Lankan households would know. But Maggie didn't come from Europe, right?
Maggie originally comes from Europe. It's a company we also acquired. There was a Swiss gentleman, Julius Maggi, so that's how you pronounce it, so the German part of Switzerland. And he became famous with something that exists still when I was a kid, in every restaurant in Austria, Germany, and Switzerland. Not a restaurant, a pub, you would have a Maggie bottle on the table. And that was a liquid seasoning to season, your soup, your dishes. And it was a fermented yeast product that, it's a quite dark brown sauce. Tastes, when you would taste it like that, horrible. But it gives a very nice, aroma to the product. And that's how Maggie started. But then, he went out to make soup cubes. And when Nestle bought it, we started to try to take these products to other parts of the world. But also you realize quite quickly, as I said, food preferences are very different. And when you give a consumer in a different part of the world this fermented yeast Maggie liquid seasoning, they didn't like it. So then they used the brand for different things. Soup cubes works a bit better, but then somebody, for example, started to use the brand for other food products, noodles. That's something we've done here for a long time. Or talking about Sri Lanka, one product that we have under the Maggie brand, and by the way, we only have this product in one country in the world, is coconut milk powder that's made here, and we also use the Maggie brand.
So, coming back to Maggie noodles, did it start in India or where did it?
It's a great question. I don't know if it started in India. India is definitely our biggest market globally. Right. We have it in other countries, Malaysia, Australia, and in here as well. But I don't know if it started in India. But India was the one that really made it into a huge success with the magic masala.
So even in India, is that the biggest?
That would be the one of our biggest products in India.
So the value proposition of Maggie is that at a relatively cost-effective price, you get a wholesome meal.
You get a wholesome meal. You get in India, it's a snack. You get this 2-minute meal. It's easy. It's very convenient to make. Right. It offers an exciting taste. But I think what really played a huge role in the success of Maggie noodles in India was the convenience, because that's why it's 2 minutes noodles. You need in the end hot water. You boil it. You add your magic masala to it, and you have a super nice tasting dish.
So Bernie, let's talk a little bit more about Nestle in Sri Lanka. Can you tell us the historical evolution and what you do now currently?
Sure. So it's also one of the countries where we have been for a long time. We came here over 118 years ago, so been in the country for a long time. First as an import business, and we started bringing in the classical products, milk powder and all this. And then in the 1980s, we started with our first local manufacturing. First local manufacturing was actually up close to Polonnaruwa. In 1984, we opened the factory we still operate today in Panala. Also first as a dairy factory where we got liquid milk, which is still a very important part also how we work with local communities to make milk powder. And then over time, we started to add more and more categories to that. And today, the Panala factory is maybe not the biggest that Nestle has in the world, but it's one of the few where we produce products in various different categories. And today we produce products in 6 different categories out of one factory. And that's also great because over 95% of what we sell locally here in Sri Lanka, we make in our own factory.
So what is your product portfolio in Sri Lanka?
So we have, it's also an interesting portfolio, which goes a bit back to your question earlier. Right. We have some of our global brands, but we also have some local brands that only exist here. The biggest brand we have in Sri Lanka is Nestle. Right. It's a brand that many Sri Lankans know that, is very, much part of their life. 1 in 4 wakes up to a cup of Nestle in the morning, power, strength, energy. That's what a lot of people know about Nestle. It's a nicely tasting malt-flavored drink. A lot of people drink with tea, but that's our biggest brand we have in the country. Then in the same, which we still call dairy beverage category, we have Milo, which is a malt chocolate drink that is maybe a bit targeting younger consumers. Either we have it as a ready-to-drink in a beverage carton, or also as a powder that you can drink at home, mix it with milk or hot, cold. So this would be our I would say the biggest part of the portfolio. Then, of course, we have our Maggie range, noodles we did talk about, but also coconut milk powder is a very important part of that portfolio. As I said, it's unique because this product is made here in Sri Lanka and it's exported to over 60 countries now. And it was developed here. And actually, it's an interesting story, Murtaza, because it was started by a crazy idea of a factory manager. We had, I think it was a Swiss or French factory manager going back to the 1980s. And we made, I told you, milk powder. And then here, of course, when you're in Sri Lanka, coconut milk is a part of people's daily life and, daily cuisine. And he said, well, when I can dry cow milk, why can't I dry coconut milk? So he took this coconut milk to the dryer. And apparently the first tests were a disaster because it's very different. When you look milk, cow milk, has about 3.5% fat. Coconut milk is, 65, 70%. So what came out was clots of fat and something, but over, some time they mastered it, and that's how coconut milk powder was invented. And today it's an important part of our local portfolio, but also, as I said, proudly exported. And we every year, the coconut sector is a big sector, and we are a big exporter of coconut milk powder.
You don't produce it in any other country?
Not in any other country, only here in Sri Lanka.
And it is sold globally?
It's sold not globally, but as I said, 60 countries. Our biggest export market now is India, followed by the Middle East, but then also, when we go to Far East, to Asia, Malaysia, even, Korea, Japan. But then also, Europe, we do have a good presence, Australia, and even the Caribbean. And
so these are mainly sold as an ethnic food, right?
They are sold as an ethnic food, but in countries where where coconut is part of daily cuisine.
Right.
It's less, for a Westerner, we associate coconut with a sweet dish or with a drink. But of course, the main consumption of coconut is in curries, making your coconut milk rice. And that's where you see our biggest markets.
So in the product portfolio that you spoke about, you didn't mention Nestle.
Nestle, we still have.
Right.
It is our milk product, milk powder, but it's a very small part of our portfolio now. Okay. It used to be quite sizable, but we have reduced our, the presence of that. To be quite frank, classic milk powder is, a quite commoditized product. And we believe that there's, better use of our technology, better use of our capital, if we, add value to a product and make it, valorize it up the value chain. So that's why we still use a lot of milk. We work in Sri Lanka with about 10,000 dairy farmers, directly, indirectly, where we collect milk through our chilling centers and acquire the milk, and then use a lot of that for Milo. Another brand I didn't talk about is Milkmaid, sweetened condensed milk, that is used a lot in-home, but also our out-of-home business, which is quite important, uses a lot of this, sweetened condensed milk for either making, sweets like toffees, or also the milk tea, where you get this very, very unique taste of mixing Milkmaid with, with tea.
So what proportion of your total portfolio is manufactured here?
93-94%.
So even Nescafe is manufactured?
Nescafe, we have two categories basically. We import Nescafe, but it's a very small part of our business.
Right.
And also infant formula, we import. Main reason is that those businesses, require very sizable factories, and the volume would simply not be here. But both of them, our coffee, we import bulk, and then we repack into local, formats and local packaging.
So just to give a sense of how your business is split, what is the largest category?
So dairy beverages is the largest, which is about 45%. This is Nestle Malt, Milo, Milkmaid that comes into that segment. The second largest, then we would say is the food or the culinary range, Maggie, which is our noodles, our coconut milk powder, and also then Maggie seasoning and cubes. Then we have a very small, relatively small Nestle nutrition business that is for infants with brands like Nan and Lactogen and Cerigro, but that's less than 10% of our business. And we have a sizable out-of-home business, we call it Nestle Professional, where we don't sell to end consumers, but we sell to the HoReCa industry, we sell to cafes. And there the big brands is Milkmaid I talked about, but then also Maggie has a professional range where we have, seasoning solutions. And also Nescafe, you see it on the streets when you drive around the country, you see this big red mug, and that's a place where you can buy on the go a cup of Nescafe.
So some years ago, you used to be a listed company in Sri Lanka, and then you decided to delist. What was the thinking?
Look, the honest answer is we were, always majority owned by our parent company. So Nestle, before the delisting, had a share of over 92%. And in all honesty, from the listing in the 1980s till the delisting 2 years ago in 2023, we never leveraged the capital market. We never raised capital. We never, in that way, were an active member of the Colombo Stock Exchange. So from that regard, it came to the point where we said, look, there is other ways how we can ensure we have the right commitment to the country, but being listed added a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of layers and hurdles. So that's why we delisted 2 years ago. But as you know, we continue to invest in the country during the crisis. So from that, nothing has changed. But globally, we only have 5 countries where Nestle is listed, and most of them it is because it's a legal requirement.
Okay. So, Buddy, what is your plans for the business going forward? What are you going to focus on?
Well, for us, I would say our local business, or our business here has 2 pillars. Of course, the most important one is the local business, being in Sri Lanka for Sri Lanka. And that's why we've been here 119 years. Some of the brands are, loved by local consumers. When we get our annual, the equity trust, we always rank as the #1 food and beverage company. And that's something we are proud of. And that's only possible because you offer high quality food for a long time. Trust you don't gain overnight. This happens for a long time. So the local business is the key part, why we are here, to make the best possible products for the consumers. And that's, as I said, we produce the majority here. That's where we work. How can we continuously, innovate our portfolio that it's relevant for the local market? Of course, the last few years were not easy. When we went through the economic crisis, we saw, disposable income collapsing. That had an impact on the entire, consumer goods industry. I think now we are in the, positive way up. You once said it nicely, the economy has stabilized. It has not yet recovered, but I think we are moving in the right way. But so for us, one pillar is being in the market for the local consumer. Then, of course, we also use Sri Lanka as an export market for coconut milk powder. And that's something where we see a huge demand globally. And we would like to really drive this business as well. We kept, investing. We now have 2 drying towers there. And that's something where we see global potential because the quality of Sri Lankan coconut is extremely high. And and a lot of that is used by chefs. And when you talk to them, they love the quality. It gives a very consistent, outcome for them. Key part of that is making sure that we get the right supply. Because even when we increase our production capacity, we need to ensure that we get the right quantity, the right quality of coconut milk to make sure that we can fulfill this. But so I think these are the 2 different parts that we manage here. And we are, as I said, we continuously invest in the business. And I think we all are positive. We all see, the country moving in the right direction. But clearly, it's very fragile. And that's something we also need to be aware of.
Now, we have seen the price of coconuts almost double. There has been a significant increase. Do you have a sense of how big your coconut milk business is? I mean, what percentage of Sri Lanka's total production do you think?
I can't tell you exactly. It's less than 10% what we buy.
But that's a sizable amount, 10%.
Less than 10. But we buy, we work with about 8,000 coconut farmers. And last year we procured coconut worth just under 7 billion rupees. Okay. This year, I would assume the number in rupees will go up because, Murtaza, as you mentioned, the nut prices went up.
So 7 billion last year.
Last year.
Yeah. So it used to be about, the wholesale price was about 100 last year and 3 billion nuts. So the market size is about 300 billion. And if you're buying 7 billion, that's about 2%, a little bit about 2%, right?
And as you said, the market, of course, the production volume in Sri Lanka was under pressure. Globally, we saw the same. The 2 big producing markets are Indonesia and the Philippines, that both produce over 13 billion nuts. And everybody dropped. Climate conditions, there were other issues. So the whole global coconut output dropped by about 3 billion, which is the size of Sri Lanka. And that's why, we saw this huge, surge in coconut prices, which of course is not good for anybody. And, as an investor, as a player in the field, you want to have some stability. And, price hikes and, spikes, they're never good because it's very hard to plan. It's very hard to predict. You have long-term supply contracts. I think there's good plans to increase the output of nuts. But of course, a lot is linked to increasing efficiencies in the local coconut production area as well.
Because funnily, even cocoa prices went up significantly, right? For chocolate, the
which is also cocoa, I think what I understand has a twofold reason. A lot of cocoa comes from Africa, so they also had some climate impact. Demand is going up, but I understand from a cocoa point of view, really there is an issue with the output because of droughts, where we saw an impact on the price levels.
A former president of Sri Lanka some years ago, maybe even before your time, had a tirade about Milo. You may have been briefed, I don't know whether you were there then. I couldn't figure out what the issue was. Was it about the sugar?
It was, as you said, it was before my time, but of course I'm very familiar with the issue. Yes, it was about the sugar. Milo is, as we call it, a malt flavored drink. So the large part of the sugar is not added. It's actually coming out of the malt, which also gives it the taste and the energy. And, I think important about Milo is it a drink that, you should drink unlimited and consume unlimited? No. But if you have an active lifestyle, then, it gives you the energy kick that you need. That's why, we work a lot with schools, with kids, on grassroots sports. For example, last weekend we had the Sri Lankan Netball Championships, which is an amazing event. It's the biggest netball tournament in the world, I was told, by the president of the Asian Netball Federation. It's only for girls. So there's 15,000 girls every year who compete. We had the national finals in Cornegala a week ago, with over 5,000 girls competing, and that's what's important. So Milo is also sports is a great teacher for life, but also we want to make sure. Look, in life you need a healthy and balanced diet, and that's where it came from. The incident is a few years ago, luckily, and it was a bit unfortunate because when you compare the Milo product with similar products, when it comes to sugar levels, energy levels, we are by far the one with the lowest sugar level in there. But we are also the biggest brand, and as a former boss of mine says, the tall trees catch the most wind.
Right, yeah, that's true. It's iconic brand for most Sri Lankan households. So you say the sugar comes from the malt, so you can't really substitute with an artificial sweetener.
No, you could substitute some, but we wouldn't want to do that because also, it's artificial sweeteners have other challenges. Now also there's a new labeling legislation or law that will come in place. It was delayed, come in place 1st of January next year, where if you use any food additives or artificial sweeteners, you need to put a warning label on the product, which says you're not suitable for consumption for kids under a certain age. And I think it's better to have a certain sugar level, and then make sure that you have moderate consumption, you have the right lifestyle. But to be fair, we have reduced the sugar level considerably in Milo, and we continue to do so. And I push my team. We're looking to launch a reduced sugar variant in that. The challenge is always that, of course, if we like it or not, sugar gives a good taste. When you look at kids, sometimes they have a sweet tooth. Yeah. But we have also an obligation, and I'm very clear about that, Murtaza, that we have to educate consumers about, consuming in moderation. And, it's too easy to say, look...
I think we have a sugar tax in Sri Lanka.
Yeah, but not in other... It's not that we have like there's a prohibitive tax that you have in other countries on this product.
So the other thing, as a global FMCG company, you basically have a large amount of spend on marketing. Do you have a sense of, as a percentage of revenue, like what does Nestle spend globally on marketing?
Yeah, it's in the high single digit of our NNS.
Right. So and similarly in Sri Lanka?
Very similar.
Very similar.
Very similar.
And out of that 9% high single digit, how much would be advertising?
Two-thirds would be advertising, and that split, of course, across different channels, depending on the country. In some countries, like here, we are still more traditional media, TV. When you go to maybe, North Asia, China, Korea, you are very much in the digital space now. But also here for us, digital is becoming more important. And, I would say our marketing advertising spend has also reached, 50% or maybe even plus on digital.
Do you do anything differently? on digital that you...
Oh, yes. Yeah. The way how it starts with different formats. Traditionally you had the famous 30-second TVC, the TV commercial that, people sit in front of the TV. When you look now, young consumers, they don't have the patience. I mean, so you need to reach them on, social media, be it Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. And then the format is different. And, they wanted, it has to be shorter, it has to be more, interesting. I think you said something about how you do these interviews. It's sometimes sound and music plays a big role, but sometimes it's irrelevant because they are watching it, on a bus where they don't play a sound. So you need to find the right way. And that's the exciting part of marketing that is changing, that what was very common for decades, I think has revolutionized very quickly. And I think we far away from the end, and we see new platforms emerging regularly. I mean, a few years ago, everybody talked about Facebook, and then Instagram came, and then suddenly TikTok is the big one, and I'm convinced there will be something else coming at a near future.
Bernie, you spoke about your factories, but another factory that you're quite famous for is a talent factory. I think one of your predecessors once complained to me that he was losing all his people, especially during the crisis. So what is it that Nestle has that is producing this great talent?
Well, first of all, I know many people complain when they lose talents. And don't misunderstand me, I'm not happy when I lose people.
Right.
But I'm always extremely happy and excited when one of our people, progresses somewhere else to a high level. Because then I think, we must do something right. So your question, what are we doing right? Of course, being a sizable company and being a multinational is aspirational for a lot of young people. And I think that's an advantage we have. But it's too easy to say, look, Nestle is big and everybody wants to work. No, that's not how it works. So it starts, we go out and work a lot with universities and with different universities. For example, supply chain technical, we work with the University of Murtaza. And, we have mentorship programs, we have internships. So we really try to not only recruit on campus, but to build these ties with the faculties that are relevant. The same would be true for marketing, for finance. So that's, I think, one of the success factors that we have. So you go quite early on. And then I think the other part is we train people, once they join, we continuously invest in people's training, in their development. Clearly, some of them, at some stage in their career, they see an opportunity outside that is, more exciting to them at that stage of their career. And I think that's perfectly fine. We don't want to lose, too many people. But, being at a talent factory, as you called it, I think is something that should make us proud. And, I am. And I think, if you have a company you work for and nobody who ever worked in this company gets a great job, I think that would be scary. And that would be something I would complain about. But being seen as, somebody producing great talents, I think is something that we are proud of. And it's a bit like the trust in our products, in our brands I talked earlier. This is something you can't do in a short period of time. I mean, that has been there for a long, long time. And, I think people still value that. The world is changing. That's very clear. I think, young people, some things are different. I think sometimes we debate this generational difference and the Gen Z and this and that. Because I think, in the end, it comes down to even young people. It's about values. It's about, getting, treated with respect. But clearly, the way how people want to, be engaged with is very different. And maybe in the future, having a career like mine where you work 25 years for one company is maybe not so common. Look, some might do it. But I think the key part is that, when somebody is with us, when she joins, when he joins, that we can, help them to learn, help them to grow. And of course, hopefully some of them will stay a large part of the journey, of their professional journey with us. But when they can, continue their learning journey somewhere else, that's also fine. And, we then continue to work with other talents.
So are you still an employer of choice in Sri Lanka? Do you get a lot of people wanting to join?
Yes, no, we do. We still, and that's great. And, and we have even during for example, the COVID crisis, we couldn't, of course, do physical internships because that was not possible. So we made what we call Nesturnships. So we made online internships. And the interesting thing is we kept doing this because we realized with the online internship, in all honesty, it is less engaging than when you have somebody in your office. But we realized we can reach way more people. And I think that's one of the important parts for a big company to help the next generation in their development journey, to find a way into the workforce. Some of them, we can hopefully offer jobs in our organization, but look, we're also limited. It's not that we have thousands of new roles, but if we can give somebody young, an opportunity to get a work experience for a few weeks, for a few months, that will help her or him to find a job somewhere else. I think that's also super important.
I was chatting to the CEO of HSBC, and they are another talent factory in banking, and he says once a year he hosts the entire alumni network of HSBC. Do you have a large alumni ex-Nestle?
We have, there's like 2-3 clubs where they get together, the ex-Nestle employees. And, many of them, as you said, have moved on to other companies. Some retired from Nestle and, then really went into retirement. Some even after retirement went on to outstanding jobs. When you look, many of the consumer goods companies in Sri Lanka have people in very senior roles who used to work with us at some stage of their career. And I always love to meet with them because, I think you learn. I also think you get something that is super important. You get honest feedback. And, for me, the key part is always, for example, when we have somebody leaving the organization to join somebody else, I try to meet everybody for an exit interview. And I always want to know what could we have done differently. And also, would you recommend somebody to join Nestle if you get asked? And I'm, always very happy to hear that the vast majority say absolutely yes. And that's good. I know there's reasons why people move on, and that can be for a different nature. But when you move out of an organization, you still say, hey, look, I'm proud of having been part of that. This alumni network, as Mark from HSBC talked about, I think that's extremely important. And for me, some of the most respected company in the world, they leverage this extremely well. I mean, Goldman Sachs, McKinsey, P&G. In India, Unilever, Hindustan, they must have I've told from a colleague, an amazing alumni network. So for me, I think this is something that, is it's an extremely important also pull factor for an employer when people join and say, look, even if I don't stay there forever, I'm part of, something that will be carrying me for the rest of my professional life.
So being the head of a leading FMCG food company, what are you seeing today about the Sri Lankan consumer?
If one word comes to my mind, it's resilience. And I think I lived in, I think, 10 countries. I've never seen any, nation with people so resilient as the Sri Lankan consumer. So I think that's important for me. That comes to mind first. But of course, I think we see a few different things. Through the latest crisis that we had, everybody was impacted. And we saw that people look much more for value. So that was something that's happening. The interesting thing now, as I said, we are luckily moving out of that, but every big event, leaves its lasting marks. And when I'm saying people used to look for value, now value alone isn't enough. That's not really making the difference, but it will always be there. So now people say, look, value, that's like now, part of the lower level of the pyramid of needs. That will always be there. But now I want to have some, innovation. I want to have some, choice. So I think also it's a consumer that is now, after, a few hard quarters, looking to try different things, try to get access to different products. So that's what we also need to do with our innovation. What can we do locally? Even, some of the smaller, maybe more premium products, we are testing a little bit to import some of them and bring to the market quickly. But I think the consumer, is now also looking for, when the economy starts to grow a bit, the consumers are also are willing to spend more and to experiment a bit with new products.
Because when I speak to some of these supermarket companies, they are bringing in private labels, store brands. Like what percentage of your sales goes through modern trade?
It's still way below 20%, so around the 15% mark. We still, as the whole country, it's still a market that is very much dominated, so to say, with general trade. But clearly, modern trade is growing. I am, a strong believer in modern trade. I think we're going to see modern trade continuously grow, and not only the two big retailers. I'm also convinced we're going to see new formats coming in. We talk about independent supermarkets. So when it's become a bit blurry between being a general trade outlet and a supermarket, but self-service, so no longer you get the guy behind the shelf, it's self-service. Some of them have air conditioning. So I think we're going to see a very interesting development in Sri Lanka over the next 5 to 10 years. Traditional trade will always be there, but I think we're going to see a change. And look, one thing that I found a bit surprising when I came, how low the penetration of e-com is still in the country.
Very low.
Extremely low.
Right.
And I know
so where were you before?
Before I was in the head office, but before that I was in China.
Right.
And China, e-commerce.
More extreme, right?
It's extreme, but it's interesting because I moved to China in 2012.
Right.
And back then China was completely analog. E-commerce was very much like, the fake products that they were exporting. And nobody talked about e-com. And I remember very early on, I had a presentation with a local economist, and then he talked about, I said, the problem for e-com, we have an extremely low credit card penetration, which was about 10, 12%, even when you used your Union Pay card. And now, you said it, Murtaza, China, everybody talks about e-com, but guess what? Credit card penetration is still extremely low, but they changed the paradigm. Yeah. And Alibaba with Alipay and WeChat with, WeChat Wallet, they digitalized the payment. And that's what, really gave the boost on e-com. So for me, I think that's at some stage.
So how did they handle the last mile?
They heavily invested in delivery drivers, all of them,
So who does the e-commerce? Is it the big platforms?
In China, it used to be the big platforms, Alibaba, AliExpress, and JD.com, they all started more from, electronics, books, but they all moved into grocery. But now you also have what they call social commerce with brands like Pinduoduo, where people buy on, something equivalent to TikTok. And then, they have their drivers. Of course, it's a highly dense, densely populated country, but, quick commerce, you order and you get your water something within 10 minutes. It sounds a bit crazy, but that's how it goes.
So when you look at the emerging issues that you're confronted with, and we have a budget that's coming up, I think, on the 7th of November, what is your wish list?
Look, I think it starts with a very basic wish that I think every investor, being foreign or local, has stability. I think the worst is these unpredictable change of direction. You make an investment here and then tomorrow, you should move the other way. So I think I know it sounds very, very basic, but I still think that this...
So you mean policy stability?
Policy stability. That, you're going to be able to plan and, you have this predictability, this planability. So I think that's an important one. Then, of course, also the ease of doing business. In all honesty, we've been here a long time and I can't really complain. I think for us as a big company, we have been, navigating through that quite well. But I know, talking to a lot of people also in the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, I know a lot of smaller companies say it's extremely complicated for them to get things approved, even know who is the person they have to talk to. So I think this is, one of the other areas where we need to ensure that we can make doing business simple. That's, I think, an extremely important one. Of course, then, we have the whole fiscal side of activities that is, I know, a bit more complex, and we are still very much, under, IMF program, and that's a needed program to stabilize the economy and to hopefully get out of that. But clearly, we need to see how can there be some, fiscal stimulus to generate economic growth. Because as you said, we have stabilized the economy, but we do not really see lasting economic growth.
Yeah, we got to certainly increase the productivity. So, leading on that, you are a foreign company, and the biggest component of FDI is reinvestment. And when you used to be a listed company, you used to declare very high rates of dividend. Are there any things that, say, the government should do to encourage, say, a company like Nestle to invest more in the country?
Look, I think, as I said, for us, we've kept investing. We maybe made lately 2 big investments. We invested in a biomass boiler, which was over ₹1 billion. We extended.
Why does it cost so much?
It's a quite technical thing to build. And if you look at this biomass boiler, I was myself surprised because it's like a factory in itself. And you burn these wood chips to then create the steam that we need. And it's sizable, so it helps.
So this is for the drying?
This is for creating steam for the factory. So we now moved all our steam where we used to have furnace oil in the past. We moved to biomass. We use solar energy as well, but for steam we use now biomass. And we, for example, we built a new line for Milo beverage cartons. So we kept investing. But I think when you look again, how to attract FDI, I mean, it's the point we talked about, having the stability. But then I think also, I understand, for example, for some investors, land is an issue. Because if you want to make an investment, well, you're not thinking about a few years. You have a timing horizon of a few decades. But sometimes then you struggle to get access to having, a long-term lease contract for the land you want to go. I think one important part is also looking at the right level of employees. I think that's an important one because we saw, of course, in the last few years, there was a lot of migration. We know that overall the population is not growing. So I think for some industries, that will also be a deciding factor to have access to people and, more importantly, to the qualified, talented people that we need to do. But I think there are, clearly opportunities to attract foreign companies to this part of the world. I mean, Sri Lanka, I truly mean this. I've been here now over 2.5 years. It's a wonderful place to live. It's a very safe place to live. I just heard today that Sri Lanka was voted, I think, as the 3rd safest place to live in Asia. And I think, it has a lot to offer. So the question is now, from an investment point of view, how can we, have some breakthrough to get some big companies coming in here and, leveraging these opportunities to service, if it's a service company, the broader region, or even all the way, like I know some of the banks or the London Stock Exchange does to use Colombo, Sri Lanka as a hub of services for their global business.
So if we go back to Nestle itself, it has a wide portfolio of products and you only do a subset. Why don't you introduce more of that product portfolio here?
So I think there's 2 ways how you could do that. One is, of course, is importing. And that, when we try something new, that's the best way to do it. Because when you want to enter a new product category, the investment in the factory is quite high. So when we look, for example, would we maybe one day look at confectionery? If we would definitely import.
But why don't you do it?
I think today,
because the tariffs are too high.
There is high tariffs in confectionery, for example. As you said, it's about 80% tariff, which makes it quite cost prohibitive. So from that perspective, that's a hard one to do. I think for us, the biggest opportunity is, of course, looking at our local product portfolio and continue to innovate and renovate and offer Sri Lankan consumers different, variants, different types of a Nestle mold or a Milo. The other important part where I think we can really leverage this country is coconut milk powder. And we see global demand for coconut going up. As I told you, we are the only market for Nestle producing coconut milk powder, and that's an opportunity. But for that, of course, we also need to make sure that we get this constant supply of coconut milk at a right price. And, if you see these fluctuations, you said it earlier, in the beginning of this year, the nut price was a little bit north of 100 rupees, and, it peaked at, the high 200s.
So, Bernie, with regard to the coconuts, because our company also used to have some involvement, it's a sector that I understand. There are issues that I've been hearing for 30, 40, 50 years that they're the same issues. But is there anything in government policy that needs to be changed?
Look, I think there's a lot of ambition of the government to change that. I had a meeting with the chairman of the Coconut Research Institute a few weeks ago, and as we said, we now have just over 3 billion nuts. They talk about 5 billion nuts by 2030, which sounds like a huge growth, and it is. On the other hand, when you look at the yield we achieve today, it's extremely low. So I know there's plans to develop a new coconut triangle in the north, but I think even increasing the yield of the existing coconuts grown will make a huge difference. And of course, that has to do with, with training and with education, where the government plays a role, but players like us and, the industry plays a role. And that's why we work with the Coconut Research Institute. We have a Nestle coconut development plan, teaching best practices of coconut growing. That does play a role. I think also that, a lot of the last few years, a lot of the coconut estates maybe were not managed in the right way.
So we call that non-resident owners.
Non-resident owners, exactly.
There is a famous saying that the best fertilizer are the footsteps of the owner. And what happens is that most of these coconut estates are owned by people in Colombo who don't visit. And since I'm familiar with this, I'll throw in some statistics, like the average yield is only 65. And the best practice alone in Sri Lanka sometimes is in excess of 100. So your research center, they must be, exactly. I mean, if you implement those best practices, do you remember the number, what you can get?
Oh, exactly. You could get, if you implement that, as I said, you could get quite easily from the 3 billion nuts to the 5 billion.
You can, just by improving.
By just improving as the yield, as you said, from, being in the 60 going up to the 100. I mean, that gives you a massive
jump. Right. So, okay.
But I think there was also for a long time, maybe the return for the coconut farmers were also not there. That's why they were the non-resident estate owners. That's something, we need to fix, because we will, we would be happy to invest in more manufacturing, production capacity at the factory. But of course, we need to, the question I get from my global shareholder is said, look, okay, fine, let's talk about that. But are you sure you can ensure we get the right flow of coconut milk?
I mean, another statistic I'd like to share with you, 20% of the arable land in Sri Lanka is with coconut trees. So, at one end, there is a lot of ambition to do some of these high-tech new economy stuff, but the mainstay, that since it's such a large part of your country's arable land, just improving that productivity will give you such a big jump, and it'll trickle down to many different stratas of society.
And I think, as you said, as you are familiar with the industry, there's also other things you could do, like undercropping. So yes, you have a tree, but there's a lot of space within the estate, between the coconut trees. So, there you could plant, cinnamon, many other things.
You can also have dairy, right?
You could potentially have dairy,
yeah.
And which is also, in all honesty, a not very efficient industry.
Right. Because the leaves will give you the shade, and the cow.
Exactly.
And then the excrements of the cow go in as fertilizers, so that whole ecosystem.
That's needed to increase the output, increase the productivity of agriculture.
So if I can, the last part, you said you lived in many countries, and you also mentioned about, Sri Lanka being ranked high up. What do you like about living in Sri Lanka?
Well, first, it's the people. And I have to say, it's extremely friendly, helpful, welcoming. And this is a nice, that's a wonderful thing, because you have the feeling that, people always want to, support you, want to help you. And then that makes you feel at home. Even, you're a foreigner and, you might look different and you have a different accent. But that's, I think, a huge thing. But, beyond that, look, it's a beautiful country. And, it's a country that offers you a lot of things to do. I love my outdoor sports. And
what do you do?
I do the traditional things like, running and cycling, but also I love this, thing called wing foiling, which is like a water sport where it's like you're on a surfboard with a sail. Right. And the great thing is I can do it at Port City here in Colombo.
Right.
So it's fun, but, I can also go up to Kapitya, or you can do it, the South Coast. There's a lot of things to do. Food, I love food. I work for a food company, but beyond that, I really enjoy, amazing, variety of food based on local ingredients. The seafood is amazing. So I think all these things, they come together. I think that's also an opportunity for the country, to be honest, Murtaza, to leverage, to attract the right people to come here. When you look, some countries have these golden visa schemes, for retirees. I think, we could do the same. We have a great medical system. it's now very well connected. Through the Middle East, you are going everywhere in Europe or even North America. We have many daily flights to Asia. So I think, that's a huge opportunity to, attract the silver lifers, those who just exit the workforce, but who have 20 active years ahead of them. And, I could imagine one day to spend, half a year here. And I think if, you do it right as a country, that can become a very interesting revenue source, because these people have money, they will spend, and that's something I would really look at. And I think there's a lot of people who really love to come to Sri Lanka.
And what are some few things that you wish were better?
Look, I think one of the areas is also, and this is maybe a bit linked to tourism.
Right.
When you look, we have, for example, beautiful beaches.
Right.
But I think we still need to work on some of the basics, the hygiene factors. And it starts with basic things when you drive. Okay, to the south we have a great highway, but let's say you want to drive from the airport to Sigiriya. I mean, for some tourists, having a decent washroom is important. Or road safety. I'm driving myself here. I don't mind it, but some people get quite scared when they see two buses coming their way on a 2-lane road. So I think it's some of these things, and it's not for me a question of people want to do something that is wrong. It's just maybe a question of knowledge. But for me, these are things we should try to address, because that, I think, will then allow us to also value up and aim, for tourists who spend, more, dollars on average per night.
You mentioned about driving, your fellow Austrian, Niki Lauda, he has come to Sri Lanka many years ago because there was a Lauda
Yes.
they used to fly. And I'd be interesting to see what he has to say about driving on Sri Lankan roads. It's quite a risky business. On that note, Bernhard, Stefan, thank you very much. It has been a fascinating conversation.
Murtaza, thanks so much. It's great for having me. Thank you.